Welcome to another episode of Learn with Flo. I am very excited to start this new series because I can't believe it, but I really haven't ever done a Learn with Flo series completely dedicated to my guys out there. And as much as we have so much time, attention, and a lot of even social media education about some of the gaps in the current healthcare system around women's health, which, don't get me wrong, they're very apparent. We have lots of content and platforms in which we've gotten to talk about that at length, and we'll continue to talk about that at length. But within the same gaps that we identify with both conventional medicine, but also with functional medicine, I don't think that we talk near enough about our males in our life also experiencing some of these same gaps as well. And I've had an influx of more male patients as of late, and I love working with both males and females alike. And I feel like my guys out there deserve their own dedicated series here to be able to discuss some of the things that are coming up in their world as well. So know that, like I said, the same gaps that exist in more of a conventional versus functional medicine field, those are also felt by guys. And I see it all the time in clinical practice where males are maybe not quite as known to be proactive about their health. They tend to kind of sit and really wait until things get pretty rocky in order to actually say something, right? They have to be pretty symptomatic either in their overall daily activities. So sometimes it's symptoms like chronic pain that tend to get their attention. There's also a lot of symptoms around guys, whether it's longevity or any sort of performance related metrics. Maybe they notice body composition shifts or muscle tone shifts, performance and recovery in the gym that might get their attention. They might also start to just get feedback from their loved ones, whether that's you're snoring all the time, you're not sleeping well. That might prompt their attention to kind of seek a little bit of a medical workup, or obviously from a sexual performance standpoint, whether it's low libido, erectile dysfunction. These are the types of symptoms that usually get the male's attention. And once those symptoms are more apparent, then obviously there's kind of a little bit more motivation or a little bit more curiosity about seeking some answers for some of those things. And so sometimes those are the main symptoms that might get the male pattern attention, but it doesn't mean that that is by any means like the root cause of what's going on under the surface. Those are just the symptoms. And that is the current very, very real reality check that we need to talk about when it comes to conventional versus more of a functional medicine approach. I think both of those systems right now are very, very good at treating symptoms and not investigating the source. And that is, if you've spent any amount of time whatsoever around the lowdown, you have realized that my holistic medicine methods were designed to fill both the gaps that both conventional and functional medicine are leaving us with right now as far as our healthcare options. And regardless, everybody is so focused on treating symptoms, and very few individuals are actually digging and being that medical detective to understand what the source of these symptoms are. And so because of that, we just end up running around band-aiding our health. We get one prescription medication for our blood pressure, and then the next year we go back and we get another prescription medication for our cholesterol, and then the next year we go back and now we're on a blood sugar lowering medication, and then all of a sudden we have a CPAP machine for our sleep apnea. And you can just see where the male population, just like our female population, just very, very quickly get shuttled into this system where we're doing nothing but chasing symptoms, and no one's truly looking at how are all of these symptoms connected together? What is the source that the body is truly trying to tell us here? And so just as much as women get victimized by this same system, men do too. And there are some very key patterns that I see most often in clinical practice with my males that are going under the radar, they're going overlooked, they're going misdiagnosed, so therefore they're getting mistreated. And when that happens, they end up, like I said, in that same that same boat of feeling stuck and feeling, like I said, that they're not really getting anywhere with their health. They're more just getting more Band-Aid solutions, whether that's more supplements, more elimination diets from their functional medicine individual, or more prescription medications from their conventional medicine. And to me, neither of those are truly the long-term solution here. And we need to be giving our men the same due diligence of that medical investigation that I demand for our females as well too. So this series is going to be really a series for him. It's his health that we're going to be talking about, and more of that root cause conversation for men. And today what I want to do is really introduce the 4 most commonly overlooked patterns that I tend to see with male population that comes into my practice. And by identifying some of these 4 common patterns, maybe you'll start to identify this for men in your life. If you are a female out there and you have men in your life, or for my male listeners and followers out there, you might self-identify with some of these things that have come up in health conversations for you, or maybe in family history kind of concerns as well too, because these, like I said, are very real patterns, and it's not something that, like I said, just has to go with another Band-Aid. Now, notoriously, of course, are we going to be talking about things like testosterone levels? Yes. Is testosterone the only conversation in male health? No. Is testosterone in any way, shape, or form the source of the issue? No. Testosterone is just another symptom of what is actually going on underneath. So this is not going to be one of those conversations just again around like testosterone replacement therapy and TRT, because I've seen so many males to where that has been like the end result or the end game, and it's not this magic panacea that we might think it is. So for the men out there, like I said, or the men in your life that you feel are exhausted, they're gaining weight like crazy, they're losing their drive and their motivation, they're sleeping terribly, maybe they've been told that their labs are fine, or maybe they've been told that they have high blood pressure, high cholesterol, high blood sugar, and they're just managing or band-aiding it right now with this growing list of medications and supplements. This is for you. Okay. That's exactly who this conversation is for. And I want to, like I said, start to bring to light some of the same patterns that I see for my males, and how we can be a lot more thorough, I guess you could say, a lot more proactive, and give men the same higher health standard that I feel like everybody deserves when it comes to their overall health. So let's really start with the reality check of what's actually happening in men's health as of today. I think that there, like I said, especially with the patients that I've been seeing in clinic, there's really 4 major common patterns that I tend to see the most in men that come into my practice, because in every single one of these cases, the conventional medicine system response has been the same. And that's been, here's a tool to manage the symptom of what we're seeing. Here's a statin to control your cholesterol. Here is a blood pressure medication. Here is metformin for your blood sugar. Here's a CPAP for your sleep apnea. And nobody is really stepping back and asking what's driving these patterns. And that gap right there of someone actually being your medical detective between just managing the symptoms versus actually resolving them and improving your health, because I guarantee, I know how fringe it might sound, but lowering your cholesterol on paper does not make you healthier, right? Lowering your blood sugar on paper does not necessarily make you healthier. Like, we can force some of these numbers on a lab, but I'm not impressed by someone's blood pressure being within optimal ranges if it's just being medically controlled there. I'm not impressed by that. That doesn't just check a box and be like, wow, I'm so healthy, I have normal healthy blood pressures. It's like, no, what we want to see is we want to see the body's innate healing capacities really kick in and not needing a blood pressure medication, right? And so if that is our standard of health, we want to take it one next step further and start to be able to further investigate that, versus just saying like, this growing list of medications and getting a new medication every single year that I go in is health. That is not health in my book. And the underlying dysfunction is still very much there. So, four most common patterns. Number one is a little bit of a broad statement, but I think it encompasses this whole system that I'll call metabolic health. Now, the metabolic health is really part of a category or a diagnosis in conventional medicine that we call metabolic syndrome. Metabolic syndrome is that you have at least 3 out of 5 of these very commonly occurring comorbidities. So this is going to be things like your cholesterol levels, your triglyceride levels, your blood pressure, as well as your blood sugar and your overall waist to hip ratio or your body composition. So all of that kind of encompassing metabolic health. I see a lot of males come into my clinic needing help and needing guidance because they've been told they have high cholesterol or high triglycerides, or their blood pressure is being controlled medicinally, or they've been put on blood sugar lowering medication. Metabolic health in that like metabolic syndrome is a very common place where many men start to insert themselves into this kind of like healthcare experience. But this is where, like I said, the conventional medicine approach versus my holistic medicine approach to metabolic health is very, very different, because the standard response that you'll probably get is, again, here's a statin for your cholesterol. Here's metformin for your blood sugar. Here's an ACE inhibitor or a beta blocker for your blood pressure. Here's a CPAP for your sleep apnea, right? It's like they're handed to men like candy, and no one's really having the conversations of, why is your cholesterol high? Why are your triglycerides high? Why is your blood sugar high? What is the inflammation patterns that is driving your blood pressure? And I think what even irks me more is that when individuals ask some of those questions to most of their healthcare providers, the answer becomes even just equally dismissive, because they might just be like, oh, it's just genetic. And it's like, yeah, are some of these things patterns that we absolutely see in family history? For sure. But your genetics are not a death sentence. So just because your mom, dad, everybody in your family has had high cholesterol does not mean that you are predetermined to have high cholesterol. Nor does it mean that that genetic predisposition isn't something that we investigate. Right? Can I change your genetics? No. Can we very much change the expression of those genetics? Absolutely. And why is nobody having that conversation to say, yeah, this has been something that has run in your family. We definitely identify a pattern here. And since you're in that higher risk category, these are the things that we should be thinking about nutritionally, lifestyle intervention perspective. These are the reasons why your genetic predisposition causes you to express that higher cholesterol right now. And that's not something that's being talked about near enough, in my opinion. So we can't just be blanketly putting individuals on statins and not also talking about how statins deplete things like CoQ10, which is direct food for the cardiovascular tissue. And really, I would say the most shocking statistics is, like I said, when we start to see individuals who are just like put on statin medications and to like artificially lower their cholesterol. Studies have actually shown that roughly half of all cardiac events, like heart attacks, actually occur in people with normal or low cholesterol levels. Not many people are talking about that, right? Which means that managing these things with just a statin, that's not the primary villain here. We need to think about where cholesterol is made. Cholesterol is made in the liver, and the liver makes more cholesterol in response to inflammation, because cholesterol is an anti-inflammatory molecule. So we blame it as the villain, but actually cholesterol is there to just try to clean up the scene of the crime. But we're not looking at that. We're not asking those questions. We would just we'll just do lazy medicine and add a statin, make your cholesterol look great on paper, and then act shocked when you still develop cardiovascular disease or you still develop a heart attack within the next 5 years. That's because we haven't done anything to improve your health by just putting you on a statin, right? Very similar to things like metformin, and we're just artificially addressing blood sugar imbalances without really looking at, like I said, nutritional patterns, nutritional intake, circadian rhythm, stress, all of those things that actually balance our blood sugar in the first place. So this metabolic syndrome is a big one. We're going to dive deeper into this topic and really talk about some of the specific interventions that I find more effective for that metabolic syndrome picture. And it's not saying that like medications are bad. They have a space and a place. But what I wish was more of the progression here is if we start with our conventional medicine, we get the labs, we get the diagnosis of high cholesterol, high blood pressure, high blood sugar. Sure, we might use some short-term intervention of some medications, but then it should be an immediate referral to someone who's going to help you get off of those medications. It's like, here, I will give you this to help lower some of the immediate risk factor, but this is what you should be working on because I only want to give you this medication for 3 months, or I only want to give you this medication for 6 months. And that gives that person enough time to then actually investigate and actually work on what are the underlying sources of the inflammation that is driving this metabolic syndrome pattern, and not be reliant on just all of these Band-Aid medications that aren't actually putting someone at a lower risk for any sort of health event in the future. So that's a big one. That's number one, is just metabolic health, metabolic syndrome, the combination between cholesterol, blood pressure, triglycerides, body composition, and overall blood pressure as well too. Closely related to that, usually men who struggle with issues in that metabolic syndrome category also get diagnosed with sleep apnea. So sleep apnea is pattern number 2 that I probably tend to see most often with men in my clinic. They are, again, handed just, here's a CPAP machine for anyone without really asking, why is the airway inflamed? Why is the airway closing on us? Sleep apnea affects nearly 30 million Americans, most of those being men. A lot of them go undiagnosed. Most of it, I would say the first clinical clue for a lot of people is disrupted sleep, feeling fatigued even after a full night's sleep, or blatant snoring, or a pause in breath cycles during sleep. Obviously, most of the time we don't notice this in ourselves. While we're sleeping, it's usually some sort of spouse, some sort of partner that we're sharing a sleeping environment with that might notice some of those patterns and kind of clue us in. So snoring, fatigue, mood disruptions, those things are usually often the first signal. And then again, you go in, you might get referred out for a sleep study. The sleep study comes back that you would be a good candidate for a CPAP. Great, awesome, fantastic. I think those are very, very valuable. But then also, where's the immediate referral to start to understand? Because usually sleep apnea is part of that comorbidity pattern where there's also other sources of inflammation going on. Usually sleep apnea goes very hand in hand with insulin resistance. So very few practitioners are actually measuring fasting insulin or actually calculating something called your HOMA IR score, really looking at, is insulin resistance actually driving this sleep apnea pattern? And a lot of individuals, like I said, can almost put their sleep apnea into remission by looking at the underlying sources of the airway inflammation. So chronic upper airway inflammation usually to me is systemic inflammation, insulin resistance, gut dysfunction, food sensitivities, even things like H. pylori, chronic heartburn, GERD, reflux. Like there's some primary structural contributors or physical contributors that almost never get discussed. And we're just going to kind of like force air into a constricted airway without really looking at, like I said, some of those other underlying drivers. So putting a CPAP on a metabolically dysfunctional male body is kind of the equivalent of just like throwing, like I said, some sand on top of a bonfire instead of bringing a fire extinguisher in and trying to put it out at the source. It's like, here, I'm just going to try to like force a little bit more calm to a bonfire that's really not going to have the biggest long-term ROI, let's put it that way. So number 1 is metabolic syndrome. Number 2 is sleep apnea. Number 3 is fatty liver disease. Fatty liver disease is definitely going under the radar unless you have some sort of scan or some sort of metabolic workup that includes more of an ultrasound or a fibroscan, sometimes you don't even start to see some of those fatty liver deposits until there's like later stage fatty liver disease. Fatty liver disease is usually, again, chalked up to, oh, it's hereditary, oh, it runs in your family, or it's chalked up to poor diet and poor lifestyle factors, specifically alcohol intake. Those things are true. Does this run in families? Yes. Does it get exacerbated by excessive alcohol consumption? Yes, absolutely. But at its core, fatty liver disease is a toxicity issue. So a lot of men that come into my clinic, they've been told they have fatty liver disease, they've been told they have fatty liver deposits, and I've had men who sit in front of me and they are stone cold sober. They eat well, they exercise, they don't drink because they know that this is part of their family history, and they're still seeing these fatty liver numbers, or they're starting to see their liver enzymes are off. And this is where we need to have a different conversation, right? This is innately a detoxification issue. Their liver is not good at detoxing, so our body stores toxins in a fat soluble state. It keeps them away from the bloodstream. It is a very, very smart mechanism, but we can't just throw all men into the same box of like, oh, you need to eat better, you need to lose weight, you need to stop drinking. And while those can be some foundational truths, it's not the full picture. And there's plenty of men that come into my practice and they just keep getting put into that conventional medicine box, even though they don't fit into it. And that's where, working together, we get to actually investigate why. Why do they have fatty liver disease? How are we reversing fatty liver disease? It is not a death sentence just based off of genetic predisposition. And it doesn't just necessarily mean that that person drinks like a fish. There could be some very real genetic and or environmental detoxification deficiency issues. So that's something that, like I said, I'm very passionate about. I love a good liver conversation, and very, very few individuals are even having that put on their radar, and it can be kind of congruent with a lot of this picture. So metabolic syndrome number 1, sleep apnea number 2, fatty liver disease number 3, which is more of a toxicity issue than anything, which brings us to number 4, the infamous low testosterone. Usually if any male is feeling any type of way, immediately they go and get their testosterone levels checked. It's just part of that, I think, a little bit of a learned response, which is great. We've gotten some great education. We've gotten us more aware of the role of hormones within the body. Testosterone is a follower, though. And what I mean by that is our hormones are just a symptom of what is going on underneath. So most of the time, men with low testosterone, which is defined by the American Urological Society as anything below 250. So you have to have a pretty low testosterone for males to even get like diagnosed for insurance coding purposes or anything like that. As pretty low testosterone, where most guys feel symptomatic below 500. So to think that a guy would have to get their testosterone levels below 250 to even be defined as low testosterone, to me, anything below 500 warrants an investigation of why. Why is your testosterone levels low? Could someone just, start hormone replacement therapy, put a pellet in, do some testosterone creams, and artificially on paper raise your testosterone? Absolutely. Does that do anything to answer why testosterone was low in the first place? No. If you discontinue the creams or the pellets, is your testosterone just going to go right back to where it was? Yup, because you didn't do anything to actually look at why. I have had plenty of men come into my practice and we don't even directly touch their testosterone. But what do we work on? We work on all of those foundational things. We work on their metabolic health, their metabolic syndrome picture. Why is your blood sugar elevated? Why is your blood pressure elevated? What about your overall liver detoxification patterns? And then looking at their labs 3 months, 6 months down the road, effectively doubling their testosterone without even touching it, it tells us that testosterone is not the culprit. Testosterone is really just a symptom, and the source is us looking elsewhere. So this is, again, where a lot of guys, they kind of just get duped into thinking like, oh, I'm going to a hormone replacement clinic and I'm getting my testosterone. that's great, and I support that because it can give guys a very necessary little lift. But if you put that in, either you dose it too high for what the foundational picture can handle, or you put testosterone replacement in too soon before some of those other foundations are answered, you get a whole storm of issues. And what I tend to see most often, some of the biggest side effects of, like, I can tell right away if a guy is on too much testosterone and their body hasn't been, like, if you don't handle blood sugars and gut health and liver detoxification before giving a guy testosterone, they get lots of side effects. They tend to get more red. They tend to get very hot and trouble regulating their body temperature. Their liver enzyme labs go through the roof. Their hematocrit gets high. They get these iron regulation issues. It's not good, right? Testosterone is a steroid hormone, so it does really boost some of those, like, it's going to expose, let's put it that way, it's going to expose some of those underlying patterns that you did not address first. So my biggest beef with that whole, like,